After Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev speech in Shusha and his interview with Reuters, in which he expressed perfectly reasonable surprise at Russia's reaction after the destruction of Azerbaijani passenger jet in last December by Russian anti-aircraft system. And also he advised Ukraine not to surrender or not to recognize the occupation of its territory by Russian aggressor. So after all that, Russian pro-war bloggers practically flooded Telegram channels and other social media platforms with calls for war against Azerbaijan. Russian propagandists are now accusing Azerbaijani intelligence services of assisting Ukraine in carrying out this unprecedented operation Spiderweb through the Azerbaijani diaspora. So the Azerbaijani diaspora was allegedly helping Ukrainian special operation. So it was a brilliant attack on Russian military airfields, the airfields of death from which planes fly to carry out orders from Russian President Vladimir Putin to kill Ukrainian women and children. We understand why these accusations are being made, because the Russian cannibal Vladimir Putin wants to add Azerbaijani women and children to his list of victims, and to start with the Azerbaijanis currently residing in the Russian Federation, whom he can repress without consequences and without fear of military response from the country Russia is planning to attack. It is clear that such statements by pro-war Russian bloggers and their accompanying narratives in Russian media, as absurd as they may seem, should not be taken lightly. This kind of rhetoric always appears when Moscow feels the need to begin preparing for a new military campaign against a so-called hostile nation. It is a classic method of shaping public opinion. This was the case before the Chechen wars, when Russian TV depicted Chechens as virtually demonic. It was also the case before the war against Ukraine, when Russian propagandists spread lies about the Maidan and later pushed the delusional myth that Ukraine had been bombing Donbass for 8 years. A region Donbass now reduced to rubble by Russia's own army and criminal political leadership. Something similar is now happening with Azerbaijan. One might dismiss the bloggers' calls for war with Azerbaijan, but given the level of irrationality among Russia's political leadership, military and irrational society, every country bordering the Russian Federation must be prepared for anything. There is no room for complacency here. Could Russia attack Azerbaijan today? On the surface, such an attack seems unlikely. Nearly all of Russia's military forces are currently focused on occupying Russian cities and towns, killing civilians, and repressing population in occupied territories. There are simply no resources left for Azerbaijan. We've seen that Russia lacks the capacity to operate on other fronts, whether in the South Caucasus or Syria, where the Assad regime collapsed largely due to Moscow's and Tehran's inability to provide meaningful support. However, we cannot rule out a scenario where Putin contemplates new military adventures if a ceasefire is reached in Ukraine, or hostilities are paused, or if some of his forces are freed up and it becomes clear that large-scale offensive against Ukrainian positions are yielding no results. Some might believe Putin would avoid attacking Azerbaijan out of fear of damaging relations with Turkish President Erdogan, a key partner for the Kremlin. But will Erdogan remain a partner in the coming months and years, especially as United States President Donald Trump pushes hard to cut off Russia's energy export by urging countries like Turkey, India, and others to stop buying Russian oil? Let's also not forget the political irrationality of the Russian president, who still believes that all former Soviet republics are not real states, but rather pseudo-states with limited sovereignty. In his eyes, their leaders are nothing more than first secretaries of Republican Communist Party committees, who owe respect to him as the general secretary. So he is general secretary and they are, local party bosses. The man sitting in the Kremlin today still hasn't realized that the shameful history of Soviet Union, an empire built on the subjugation of other nations, ended long ago in disgrace. Therefore, it is clear that surprises from Putin are always on the table. Ignoring the statements of his propagandist would be unwise. In the case of Azerbaijan, the threat might not even take the form of a full-scale military campaign. It could begin with so-called protection of Azerbaijani national minorities by paramilitary units or militias allegedly formed in neighboring North Caucasus Republic. Russia has often used such justification to launch aggression, whether it be in the name of protecting Russian speakers or other invented causes. We've seen this before with the People's Republic in Donbass or with Transnistria, which has been under Russian control since the late 80s and early 90s. These are textbook examples of how Russia fabricates and executes provocations. It's also important to remember that Putin isn't inventing anything new. He's simply following in the footsteps of his Soviet and Russian predecessors, who laid the groundwork for such interventionist tactics. Thus, we must think about the safety of the Azerbaijani diaspora in Russia, which is likely to face difficult times, and also the security of Azerbaijan itself, especially after the statements made by its president. Thank you for watching, have a nice day, and Slava Ukraini!